What if that dirty, damaged penny sitting in your old collection isn't worthless at all? What if the scratches, dark surfaces, or strange-looking dates are hiding a coin collectors would actually stop and investigate? In today's video, we're examining 4 Lincoln cents that may look ordinary, worn, or even damaged at first glance. The * 1935 Lincoln Wheat Cent, 1969 D Lincoln Cent, 1957 D Lincoln Wheat Cent, and 1923 Lincoln Wheat Cent ***. Some are common dates, some have famous varieties connected to them, and some have features that could easily be mistaken for a rare mint error. But here's the important part: a dirty coin isn't automatically a valuable coin. The real question is what happened to it before and after it left the US Mint. So before you throw away that old penny or clean it up, take a closer look. Because sometimes the difference between ordinary damage and a genuine mint-made variety can completely change the story and potentially the value of a Lincoln cent. Stay with us until the end, because one of these coins has a connection to a famous Lincoln cent rarity that has brought extraordinary prices at auction. The 1935 Lincoln Wheat Cent may look like nothing more than an ordinary old penny, but this small copper coin comes from an important chapter in American history. Struck at the Philadelphia Mint without a mint mark, the 1935 Lincoln Wheat Cent was produced during the years when the United States was still recovering from the Great Depression. And while the date itself is not considered a major rarity, exceptional examples and recognized varieties can tell a very different story. The Lincoln cent had already been part of American life for more than 25 years by 1935. The design was introduced in 1909 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. Victor David Brenner created the famous portrait of Lincoln, and his design became one of the most recognizable images ever placed on an American circulating coin. By 1935, the Lincoln cent was no longer a new design. Americans had already carried these pennies through the First World War, the economic boom of the 1920s, and the devastating financial crisis of the Great Depression. A humble 1-cent coin was used every day in stores, banks, streetcars, businesses, and family households. That historical background gives the 1935 Lincoln Wheat Cent an importance that goes beyond its face value. Every surviving example is a small physical connection to an America that looked very different from the country we know today. The 1935 Philadelphia issue had a mintage of approximately 245,388,000 pieces. That is a large production number, and it tells us immediately that the ordinary 1935 cent is not considered a major rarity simply because of its date. The coin weighs about 3.11 grams, measures 19 millimeters across, and was struck in the traditional bronze composition of approximately 95% copper with the remaining 5% made up of tin and zinc. It has a plain edge, which is normal for this series. Because this coin was struck at Philadelphia, there is no mint mark beneath the date. That is important for collectors who are examining an old Lincoln cent. A missing mint mark on a 1935 Philadelphia cent is not an error. It is exactly what we would expect from a Philadelphia issue of this period. The obverse carries the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln facing right. Above Lincoln appears the inscription "In God We Trust." The word liberty is positioned to the left of his portrait, while the date 1935 appears on the right side. The design may look simple, but the details are extremely important when evaluating condition. Collectors pay attention to Lincoln's hair, cheek, jaw, lettering, date, and the overall sharpness of the strike. On a heavily circulated coin, many of these details can become soft or disappear completely. ***, now turn the coin over, and you see the classic wheat reverse that gives this series its famous name. 2 wheat ears frame the central denomination 1 cent, along with the inscription United States of America. Above the design appears the traditional motto E pluribus unum. This wheat reverse was used from 1909 through 1958, making it one of the most recognizable designs in American coinage. ***, the reverse is also important because it helps collectors determine whether the coin has the expected design characteristics. A genuine 1935 Lincoln Wheat Cent should show the proper lettering, wheat ears, spacing, and overall design style associated with the series. When it comes to condition, the difference between an ordinary circulated coin and an exceptional mint state example can be enormous. A circulated 1935 cent may show wear on Lincoln's portrait, flattened wheat details, scratches, discoloration, and other signs of years spent in commerce. These characteristics generally reduce its value. At the other end of the scale are coins that have survived with extraordinary preservation. Original red color can be particularly important on copper cents. Collectors generally distinguish between brown, and red examples, with original red color in very high grades often bringing substantial premiums. And this is where the 1935 Lincoln wheat cent becomes much more interesting. PCGS records an auction result of $84,000 for an exceptionally high-grade 1935 cent graded MS68 Plus red. That coin sold at Heritage Auctions in January of 2025. But this result should never be interpreted as the normal value of a 1935 penny. It represents an extraordinary coin at an extraordinary level of preservation. In other words, the date alone did not create that price. The grade, preservation, original color, eye appeal, certification, and competition among collectors all played major roles. There is another reason collectors should examine a 1935 cent carefully. The date is associated with a recognized double-die obverse variety, including the FS101 attribution. But this is exactly where careful examination becomes important. A genuine doubled die is created during the die-making process and can produce repeated or doubled design elements in specific areas of the coin. It is very different from ordinary damage or doubling caused during the striking process. Collectors should therefore avoid assuming that every unusual-looking 1935 date is a doubled die. Lighting, wear, photography, scratches, corrosion, or other surface problems can make normal details appear distorted. If you are examining a suspected variety, look for consistent doubling in the appropriate design areas, rather than simply searching for a date that looks larger than normal. Compare the coin with authenticated examples and reliable variety references. When the potential value becomes significant, professional attribution or certification can provide much stronger evidence than appearance alone. This distinction between a genuine mint-made characteristic and post-mint damage is one of the most important lessons in coin collecting. A scratch happened after the coin left the mint. Corrosion happened after production. Cleaning happened after production. A genuine doubled die, on the other hand, is connected to the manufacturing process. The market treats those situations very differently. The same principle applies to the color and surfaces of the coin. Copper naturally changes over time, and environmental exposure can produce dark brown, reddish brown, or other discoloration. Moisture, chemicals, improper storage, and contact with certain materials can damage the surface. A dirty or damaged 1935 cent may look dramatic, but dirt does not automatically make the coin rare. In fact, environmental damage can make a coin less desirable because collectors generally prefer original, stable surfaces. That is why you should never polish or aggressively clean an old Lincoln wheat cent. Scrubbing, chemical treatment, or polishing can permanently alter the surface and may destroy evidence that could have helped determine the coin's originality. Instead, preserve the coin as you found it. Look carefully at the date. Check the area where a mint mark would normally appear. Examine Lincoln's portrait and the lettering. Study the wheat reverse. If you see something unusual, compare it with authenticated examples before deciding that you have discovered an error. Weight can also provide useful information when authenticity is in question. A normal 1935 Lincoln cent should be around 3.11 grams, although a scale reading by itself is never enough to authenticate a coin. Damage, wear, corrosion, and measurement differences must all be considered. Authentication becomes especially important when a coin appears to be an unusual variety or an exceptionally high-grade example. Professional grading services can evaluate the coin's authenticity, condition, variety, and overall marketability. For most collectors, however, the 1935 Lincoln wheat cent is much more accessible. Its large mintage means that circulated examples are not normally rare. What makes individual coins stand out is preservation, color, recognized varieties, unusual mint-made characteristics, and collector demand. That is also what makes this coin such an interesting piece of history. Imagine a 1935 penny entering circulation during the final years of the Great Depression. It could have passed through a grocery store, a bank, a family business, or the pocket of someone simply trying to get through difficult economic times. That tiny coin may have been handled hundreds or thousands of times before eventually disappearing into a drawer, an old coin jar, or a family collection. Today, more than 90 years later, collectors are looking at the same portrait and the same wheat ears and asking a completely different question. What happened to this coin? Was it simply a well-used example of a common date? Did it preserve an unusually strong strike? Did it retain original red color? Does it contain a legitimate doubled die? Or has damage and environmental exposure simply made an ordinary coin look unusual? That is the real excitement of the 1935 Lincoln wheat cent. It reminds us that value is not determined by age alone. A coin can be more than 90 years old and still be relatively common. At the same time, an exceptional example of that same date can become highly desirable when condition and rarity come together. So if you have a 1935 Lincoln wheat cent, don't judge it only by how old it looks. Examine the date, the surfaces, the lettering, the wheat reverse, and the overall condition. If you suspect a recognized variety, don't clean the coin and don't rely on a dramatic claim from the internet. Compare it carefully with documented examples and consider professional authentication when the evidence justifies it. 1935 Lincoln wheat cent may not be a rare coin in ordinary circulated condition, but its history, classic design, recognized varieties, and extraordinary high-grade examples give it a permanent place in American numismatics. And that is what makes this little penny worth another look. Sometimes the most interesting discovery is not a coin that looks spectacular at first glance, but one that rewards careful examination and reveals exactly what makes it different. The 1969 D. Lincoln Memorial cent comes from one of the most interesting periods in modern American coinage. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary copper penny from the late 1960s. But this date deserves careful attention because 1969 is closely connected to one of the most famous and valuable Lincoln cent varieties ever discovered. The key word here is D. The D mint mark tells us that this particular coin was struck at the Denver Mint. And that single letter is extremely important because the famous 1969 doubled die belongs to the San Francisco issue, not the ordinary Denver issue. The Lincoln cent had already been part of American life for 60 years when this coin was produced. In 1959, the original wheat reverse was replaced with the Lincoln Memorial design to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. By 1969, Americans were carrying a coin design that had become familiar across the country. The United States was also going through a remarkable period. The country was experiencing rapid technological development, cultural change, political tension, and major events connected to the space program. In fact, 1969 was the year Americans reached the moon with Apollo 11. A small Lincoln cent circulating during that year therefore connects directly to a fascinating moment in American history. The 1969 D. Lincoln Memorial cent was struck from the traditional bronze composition used for Lincoln cents of the period. It weighs approximately 3.11 grams and measures about 19 millimeters in diameter. The coin has a plain edge and the familiar copper-based appearance associated with pre-1982 Lincoln cents. The Denver Mint produced a very large number of these coins, so the ordinary 1969 D cent is not considered rare simply because of its date. Large production and widespread circulation mean that many examples survived. But rarity is not always about the date. Sometimes it is about a particular die, a particular variety, or a specific manufacturing characteristic. The obverse features Abraham Lincoln facing right. Above his portrait is the inscription "In God We Trust." Liberty appears to the left while the date 1969 is positioned below Lincoln's portrait. The D mint mark appears beneath the date, identifying the Denver Mint. That D is the first thing collectors should check. On the reverse, the coin features the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The words United States of America appear above the building, while 1 cent is positioned below it. The traditional motto E pluribus unum appears above the memorial. The design was created by Frank Gasparro and remained on the Lincoln cent for decades. The reverse also provides an important clue for collectors searching for varieties. On certain 1969 D cents, specialists have identified varieties involving the designer's initials. One recognized variety is the 1969 D No FG variety, referring to the absence of Frank Gasparro's initials near the base of the memorial. A variety like this is very different from damage. If the initials are missing because of a die characteristic created during production, that can be a legitimate collectible variety. But if the initials were worn away, scratched, polished, or affected by corrosion, the situation is completely different. This is why close examination matters. The biggest source of confusion surrounding the 1969 date is the famous 1969 S doubled die obverse. This is one of the most important modern Lincoln cent varieties, and authenticated examples can be extremely valuable. But it is not the same coin as a 1969 D. A genuine 1969 S doubled die obverse can show strong doubling on parts of the lettering and date. Because of its rarity and dramatic appearance, it has become one of the most famous varieties in American numismatics. Collectors searching a 1969 D should therefore never assume that an apparent doubled date automatically connects the coin to the famous 1969 S variety. Mechanical doubling, also called strike doubling, can create flat or shelf-like secondary images. It is a result of the striking process and is not the same thing as a doubled die. True doubled dies have specific characteristics created when the working die itself receives a doubled impression during the die-making process. The shape, location, and direction of the doubling must be examined carefully. This distinction can mean the difference between an ordinary coin and a significant collectible variety. Condition is another major factor. A circulated 1969 D cent may show scratches, discoloration, flattened details, or darkened surfaces from decades of handling and environmental exposure. These characteristics generally reduce collector appeal. High-grade examples are a different story. Collectors look for sharp details, attractive original surfaces, strong strikes, and desirable copper color. On copper Lincoln cents, color designation can have a major effect on the market when the coin reaches high grades. A coin that has remained original and attractive can be considerably more desirable than another coin with the exact same date and mint mark that has been cleaned or damaged. That is why cleaning should be avoided. If you discover a 1969 D cent that looks dark, dirty, or unusual, do not polish it. Do not use chemicals to brighten the copper. Do not scratch the surface in an attempt to reveal details. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and can make authentication and grading more difficult. Instead, preserve the coin exactly as you found it. Examine the date under good lighting. Confirm the D mint mark. Study the lettering and Lincoln's portrait. Turn the coin over and carefully inspect the memorial and the area around the designer's initials. If you believe you see doubling, compare the exact shape and location with documented examples rather than relying on a photograph or a general impression. Authentication becomes especially important when a suspected variety could have substantial value. Professional grading and attribution can provide confidence that the coin is genuine and that the claimed variety is actually present. The 1969 D. Lincoln Memorial Cent also tells an interesting story about everyday American life. This was a coin made to be spent. It passed through cash registers, pockets, vending machines, stores, banks, and household coin jars. Most people who handled one in 1969 had no idea that collectors decades later would examine tiny details in the design looking for differences created at the mint. That is one of the great attractions of coin collecting. A coin does not have to be rare in its ordinary form to become interesting. Sometimes the excitement comes from discovering a small difference that separates one example from millions of others. For the 1969 D. Lincoln Memorial Cent, the most important lesson is simple. Do not confuse it with the famous 1969 S double die. Check the mint mark first. Then examine the coin carefully for legitimate varieties, including documented examples such as the No FG variety. Look at the surfaces and determine whether unusual characteristics appear to be mint-made or whether they are simply the result of circulation, cleaning, corrosion, or other post-mint damage. And remember that a dramatic appearance does not automatically equal a dramatic value. The ordinary 1969 D. Lincoln Memorial Cent is a collectible piece of American history, but the truly interesting examples are the ones where rarity, condition, variety, and authentication come together. So if you find a 1969 D. Lincoln Cent in an old collection or forgotten coin jar, don't immediately dismiss it because millions were produced. Take a closer look at that small D beneath the date. Study the design, inspect the reverse, and compare any unusual features with trusted references. Because in Lincoln Cent collecting, one small detail can change the entire story. And with the 1969 D, knowing exactly what you are looking at is far more important than simply knowing the year on the coin. The 1957 D. Lincoln Wheat Cent comes from the final chapter of one of the most beloved designs in American coinage. At first glance, it may look like just another old wheat penny. But this coin was struck only a few years before the famous wheat reverse disappeared from American cents forever. By 1957, the Lincoln cent had already been in circulation for nearly half a century. The original design had been introduced in 1909 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. Victor David Brenner's portrait of Lincoln quickly became one of the most recognizable designs in American coinage. The 1957 D was produced at the Denver Mint during a period of major change in the United States. America was entering the modern post-war era. New technology was changing everyday life, suburbs were expanding, consumer products were becoming more common, and the country was entering a new period of economic and cultural development. Yet in the pockets of ordinary Americans, the classic Lincoln Wheat Cent was still being used every day. The The 1957 D Lincoln wheat cent is made from the traditional bronze composition used for Lincoln cents of this period. It weighs approximately 3.11 grams and measures about 19 millimeters in diameter. The coin has a plain edge and contains approximately 95% copper, with the remaining metal consisting primarily of tin and zinc. The D mint mark beneath the date identifies the Denver Mint. Denver produced a very large quantity of 1957 Lincoln wheat cents. More than 1 billion were struck at the Denver Mint that year. That enormous mintage is one of the first things collectors should understand. The date and mint mark alone do not make the 1957 D a rare coin. Millions of examples survived, and circulated specimens can still be found in collections, inherited coin jars, dealer inventories, and old wheat penny accumulations. But a large mintage does not mean every individual example is identical. Condition can make a dramatic difference. The obverse carries Abraham Lincoln's familiar portrait facing right. Above him is the inscription "In God We Trust." Liberty appears to the left, and the date 1957 is positioned to the right of Lincoln's portrait. Directly beneath the date is the D mint mark representing Denver. For collectors, the condition of these design elements can tell an important story. Lincoln's hair, cheek, jaw, lettering, date, and surrounding fields all show different levels of wear depending on how heavily the coin circulated. Asterisk asterisk, turn the coin over and you see the classic wheat reverse. 2 wheat ears frame the words 1 cent in United States of America, while E pluribus unum appears above. This design had been used since 1909 and would remain on the Lincoln cent through 1958. The 1957 D therefore belongs to the closing years of the wheat reverse, only 1 year before the final regular wheat cents were produced. Asterisk asterisk, that timing gives this coin special historical appeal. In 1958, the United States Mint struck the final regular Lincoln wheat cents. The following year, the reverse changed to the Lincoln Memorial design. So when you hold a 1957 D wheat cent, you're holding a coin from the final years of a design that had accompanied Americans through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the economic changes of the 1920s and 1930s, and the transformation of post-war America. That long history is part of what makes wheat cents so popular with collectors. Now, what should you look for if you find a 1957 D? The first step is to verify the date and mint mark. Make sure the coin actually reads 1957 and that the D beneath the date is genuine and undamaged. Next, examine the overall condition. Collectors look for sharp details, original surfaces, attractive color, and minimal damage. Lincoln cents can be described as brown, or red depending on the color and preservation of the copper. A heavily circulated brown coin may have relatively modest collector value. A sharply preserved example with attractive original color can be much more desirable. This is one of the most important principles in coin collecting. 2 coins can have exactly the same date and mint mark, but have very different market values because one has survived in much better condition. The same principle applies to varieties and mint errors. A genuine mint-made error can make an otherwise common date much more interesting. Depending on the error, collectors may encounter characteristics such as off-center strikes, clipped planchets, die cracks, doubled dies, or other unusual production features. But unusual does not automatically mean valuable. A scratch made after the coin left the mint is not a mint error. Neither is corrosion, cleaning, polishing, or damage caused by chemicals or the environment. This distinction is especially important when examining old copper cents, because their surfaces can change dramatically over decades. A 1957 D that has been stored in a damp environment may develop dark brown, reddish, or other discoloration. Environmental exposure can sometimes make the coin look much more dramatic than it originally appeared, but damage does not create rarity. If you find a dark or dirty 1957 D, resist the temptation to clean it. Polishing the copper can leave scratches and permanently change the original surface. Chemical cleaning can also destroy the natural appearance that collectors value. The safest approach is simple. Preserve the coin as you found it. If you believe there is a possible variety or mint error, examine it carefully under magnification and compare the feature with reliable references. Weight can also be useful when investigating an unusual coin. Normal bronze Lincoln cent from this period should be around 3.11 grams. However, weight alone cannot prove an error or authenticity because normal tolerance, where corrosion and damage can affect measurements. When a potentially valuable variety or unusual mint error is involved, professional authentication or certification can be worthwhile. The 1957 D is also interesting because it represents a moment when the wheat cent was nearing the end of its long journey. For almost 50 years, Americans had seen the same basic Lincoln portrait and wheat reverse on their 1-cent coins. Children grew up with them. Businesses handled them every day. Families saved them in jars and drawers. And yet by 1959 the wheat ears would disappear from America's circulating cents and be replaced by the Lincoln Memorial. That makes the 1957 D part of the closing era of an iconic American coin design. Imagine one of these cents entering circulation in the late 1950s. It could have been used at a grocery store, dropped into a vending machine, carried in a schoolboy's pocket, or placed into a household coin jar. Decades later, that same coin might be discovered by someone searching through an inherited collection. The coin may be worn, dark, or scratched, but the date still connects it to 1957, and the wheat reverse still connects it to nearly half a century of American history. That is why collectors continue searching these coins, even though the ordinary 1957D is not a major rarity. The excitement comes from finding the exceptional example. A high-grade coin with strong original surfaces can attract more attention than an ordinary circulated example. A legitimate mint error or recognized variety can also change the coin's collector status, but the value should always be based on evidence. A large-looking date does not automatically make the coin rare. A dark surface does not automatically indicate an error, and a coin being more than 60 years old does not automatically mean it is worth thousands of dollars. Collectors should look at the complete picture: date, mint mark, condition, surfaces, color, strike, variety, error characteristics, authentication, and actual collector demand. When those factors come together, a common-looking penny can become a genuinely interesting numismatic discovery. The 1957 D Lincoln wheat cent may have been produced in enormous numbers, but it remains an important coin because it belongs to the final years of the classic wheat reverse. It represents the end of an era in American coinage and the beginning of a new chapter that would soon introduce the Lincoln Memorial. So if you find a 1957 D wheat cent, don't judge it only by its worn appearance or its large mintage. Examine the date, check the D mint mark, study the surfaces, and look carefully for legitimate characteristics created at the mint. Most examples will simply be affordable pieces of American history. But the best examples, recognized varieties, and authenticated mint errors can tell a much more interesting story. And that is the real appeal of the 1957 D Lincoln wheat cent. It may not be rare simply because it is old, but every surviving example carries a small piece of the final years of one of America's most recognizable coin designs. 1923 Lincoln wheat cent takes us back to a very different America. More than a century ago, this small copper coin was moving through a country entering the exciting but complicated decade of the 1920s. Today, surviving examples can range from heavily worn pieces with modest collector value to exceptionally preserved coins that attract serious attention. The 1923 Lincoln wheat cent was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which means it carries no mint mark. That detail is completely normal for this coin and is one of the first things collectors should understand when examining an example. The Lincoln cent itself had been introduced in 1909 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. Victor David Brenner created the famous portrait on the obverse, giving the United States one of its most recognizable circulating coin designs. By 1923, the Lincoln wheat cent had already been circulating for more than a decade. America had changed dramatically during those years. The country had experienced the First World War, major industrial growth, social changes, and the beginning of the modern consumer era. The 1920s were bringing automobiles, radios, new forms of entertainment, and expanding industries into everyday American life. Yet the humble 1-cent coin remained an essential part of daily commerce. The 1923 Philadelphia Lincoln wheat cent had a mintage of approximately 30,800,000 pieces. Compared with some Lincoln cent issues that were produced in much larger quantities, that is a relatively modest production figure. But a lower mintage does not automatically make every surviving example rare. Collectors also have to consider how many coins survived, what condition they are in, whether they have original surfaces, and whether a particular coin contains a recognized variety or genuine mint-made error. The coin weighs approximately 3.11 grams and has a diameter of about 19 millimeters. It was struck in the traditional bronze composition used for Lincoln cents of this era, consisting primarily of copper with smaller amounts of tin and zinc. The edge is plain. Because this is a Philadelphia issue, there is no letter beneath the date. That absence is not an error. During this period, Philadelphia cents were normally struck without a mint mark, while cents produced at Denver or San Francisco carried their respective mint marks. So if your 1923 Lincoln wheat cent has no mint mark, that is exactly what you would expect from a Philadelphia example. The obverse presents Abraham Lincoln facing right. Above his portrait is the inscription "In God We Trust." Liberty appears to the left of Lincoln, while the date 1923 is positioned on the right side of the design. On a heavily circulated coin, the date can become weak or partially worn away. That is especially important with an old coin like this because damage around the date can sometimes make the numbers appear unusual. ***, the reverse carries the classic wheat design that gives the series its famous name. Two wheat ears frame the denomination 1 cent and the words United States of America. Above the design is the motto E pluribus unum. This wheat reverse had been used since the beginning of the Lincoln cent series in 1909 and would remain on the coin until 1958. ***, for collectors, the reverse provides another opportunity to evaluate condition. The wheat stalk should be examined for remaining detail. The lettering should be checked for unusual shapes or damage. The rims and fields should also be inspected carefully, because these areas can reveal signs of circulation, cleaning, scratches, corrosion, or other problems. And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges with an old 1923 cent: condition. A coin that has spent decades in circulation may show heavy wear across Lincoln's portrait and the wheat reverse. The surface may have darkened naturally over time, or it may have been affected by moisture, soil, chemicals, or improper storage. Environmental damage can sometimes be severe enough to make the coin look rusty, dark, or heavily corroded. But an unattractive surface does not automatically mean the coin is rare. In fact, collectors generally prefer original and stable surfaces. Heavy corrosion, harsh cleaning, scratches, and chemical treatment can reduce the coin's desirability. This is why you should be especially careful if you discover a rough-looking 1923 Lincoln wheat cent. Do not polish it. Do not scrub the surface. Do not use chemicals to remove dark areas, and do not try to repair the date. Cleaning can permanently change the coin and may actually make it less desirable to collectors. More importantly, once the original surface has been altered, it can become much harder to determine what happened to the coin during its long history. The date itself deserves special attention. If a 1923 cent has a damaged or partially missing date, the first question should be whether the missing detail is the result of normal circulation or post-mint damage. A scratch across a digit can make the number look distorted. Corrosion can eat away portions of the surface. Repeated contact with other objects can flatten important details. None of those situations represents a rare mint error. A genuine mint-made error must have been created during the manufacturing process. That distinction is critical. For example, collectors can encounter genuine errors involving the planchet, dies, or striking process. But each type of error has specific characteristics that can be studied and compared with documented examples. If you believe your 1923 cent contains an unusual feature, examine it carefully rather than immediately assigning a dramatic value. Magnification can help. Good lighting can help. Comparison with authenticated examples can help even more. And if the coin appears to have a potentially significant variety or mint error, professional authentication can provide the strongest evidence. The same principle applies to authenticity. Most old Lincoln cents are genuine, but valuable or unusual examples can attract attention from counterfeiters and coin alterations. Weight, diameter, design details, lettering, surfaces, and overall manufacturing characteristics can all provide useful information. No single characteristic should be treated as absolute proof of authenticity. For a valuable or unusual coin, professional examination and certification can provide additional confidence. The 1923 Lincoln wheat cent also has something that cannot be measured on a price guide: history. Imagine this coin entering circulation in 1923. Automobiles were becoming increasingly common on American roads. Radio was beginning to transform entertainment and communication. Factories were producing goods at an expanding rate, and cities were growing rapidly. This little penny could have been involved in everyday transactions during that period. It might have been used to buy a small item at a neighborhood store. It could have passed through a bank, a cash register, or a family's hands before disappearing into a drawer for decades. That long journey is part of the appeal of old coins. A worn 1923 cent may not be valuable in a financial sense, but it can still be historically fascinating. The coin connects us directly to an America that existed more than 100 years ago. From a collecting perspective, the 1923 Philadelphia issue is especially interesting because its production was much lower than many other Lincoln cent dates. But collectors should not confuse a relatively modest mintage with extreme rarity. The surviving population matters, condition matters, originality matters, and recognized varieties or genuine mint errors can matter even more. A heavily damaged example with a weak date and corroded surfaces will generally have far less collector appeal than a well-preserved coin with clear details and original surfaces. This is one of the most important lessons in numismatics. The same date can exist in many different levels of condition, and the market does not treat them equally. A collector searching through an old collection should therefore resist the temptation to judge the 1923 cent simply by looking at the date. Check the mint mark area and remember that no mint mark is normal for Philadelphia. Examine the date carefully, study Lincoln's portrait, look at the lettering, inspect the wheat stalks, check the rims and surfaces. And if something appears unusual, determine whether the feature could have been created at the mint or whether it is simply the result of more than a century of wear and environmental exposure. That careful approach is far more reliable than assuming every damaged old penny is a hidden fortune. The 1923 Lincoln wheat cent is a survivor from the early years of modern American history. Its Philadelphia origin, classic Lincoln portrait, wheat reverse, relatively modest mintage, and connection to the rapidly changing America of the 1920s make it an important coin for collectors of the series. But its greatest lesson may be even simpler. Age alone does not guarantee rarity. A missing mint mark does not automatically mean an error. A damaged date does not automatically mean a valuable variety, and a dirty or corroded surface does not create a premium. The real value comes from evidence. If your 1923 Lincoln wheat cent has strong preservation and authenticated variety or a genuine mint-made error, then its story can become much more interesting. But even an ordinary worn example deserves a second look because it has survived more than a century of American history. So before you clean it, spend it, or dismiss it, take a moment to examine it carefully. That small 1923 penny may not be a fortune, but it is a genuine piece of the America of the 1920s, preserved in metal and carried forward into the hands of a new generation of collectors.